This is a screencast to help students studying of mice and men. It is designed for my honors American literature students. These students tend to go deeper with their analysis than the typical classroom, and as I have found that there are often a variety of very strong feelings towards the character of Curley's wife, one, if not the most complex character in the novella, I think that it is important to dive deeper into the person that hides herself behind a persona. I'm starting with a quotation from Steinbeck himself, saying that to know Curley's wife would be to love her, a trusting yet hardened girl accustomed to a male-dominated society, pretending to be something she is not, alone and unloved. Steinbeck should know, as he is the creator of Curley's wife. However, I think that it's fair to recognize then that there are places in the story where we do not really know her. Much like Steinbeck uses setting to frame the story, wedging the drama between two lush and symbolic nature scenes, it is worth looking at how he chooses to frame the character of Curley's wife. Before we even meet her, we are predisposed against her. As Candy introduces George and Lenny to life at the ranch, he conveys nothing but negativity when he discusses Curley's wife. It is said that Curley has gotten worse lately after having gotten married 2 weeks ago, and Candy describes his wife as having the eye. Soon after, he describes her as a tart. George remarks that no wonder he, meaning Curley, has ants in his pants. At this point, George only knows what he has been told about Curley's wife. This is true of the reader, too. All we know is that she is surrounded by negative connotations, as told by one of the first men that we meet on the ranch. When Curley's wife does make an appearance in Chapter 2, we are predisposed to think negatively about her, and the scene seems to suit this negativity. The rectangle of sunshine in the doorway was cut off. A girl was standing there looking in. She had full, rouged lips and wide-spaced eyes, heavily made up. Her fingernails were red. Her hair hung in little rolled clusters like sausages. She wore a cotton house dress and red mules, on the insteps of which were little bouquets of red ostrich feathers. "I'm looking for Curley," she said. Her voice had a nasal, brittle quality. When she enters, she blocks the light in the room, creating an element of darkness. Notice all the red and the details, such as the ostrich feathers. Why bright red? Does it signify a fashion choice? Danger? Love? Passion? Blood? Why ostrich feathers? Ostriches are flightless birds, and to choose an odd bird such as this is not an accident. Curley's wife, therefore, is not connected to a bird in flight. Is she a kept bird? A caged bird? One that cannot fly away? Is Curley's wife trapped? George looked away from her and then back. "He was in here a minute ago, but he went." "Oh!" She put her hands behind her back and leaned against the door frame so that her body was thrown forward. "You're the new fellas that just come, ain't ya?" Her cotton dress, at the very least, becomes opaque as she thrusts her upper body, and therefore her breasts, forward as she stands leaning against the door jamb. After she leaves the bunkhouse, we are told that she is a tramp, and a rat tramp of a girl. She does appear to be very flirtatious and showy, and although proclaiming that she is looking for Curley, she likely has no reason to be there other than to meet the new guys and to flirt. Yet, Steinbeck tells us that to know her is to love her. So there must be more to this girl than what we see on the surface. One important thing to consider is that she is living in a male-dominated society. Her husband seems to be an aggressive bully, and there are not any females for her to talk to. Notice that there is no Mrs. Boss. She is it. She isn't supposed to speak to the ranch hands, yet it is likely that she is desperate for company. However, the guys do not see her as a person. Instead, they focus on her sexuality, Curley included. She's portrayed as a woman on the prowl. a sexual predator. Curley himself brags about his Vaseline-filled glove and is continually worried that his wife is meeting up with other guys. Even if the guys did see her as a person, they are fearful of getting in trouble with Curley, the boss's son, so she is someone to be avoided. She remains nameless, with her identity only coming from her husband. Slim is the only person on the ranch, immediately described as friendly, regal, and fair, who seems to accept her at face value, and because of this, it elicits rumors of a romantic relationship between the two. Does he flirt with her? Perhaps, a bit, as he does greet her with a comfortable, "Hey, good looking." But if you put yourself in Curley's wife's shoes, would you rather be greeted with that, or be flatly ignored, or told to go away? So, there are rumors about her meeting up with Slim in the barn, but there is no evidence to show that this is true. The barn is a setting where bad things seem to happen. It's not nature, yet it's not the bunkhouse. It also has Crooks's room attached to it, and it is in Crooks's room that we see Curley's wife's real meanness. Actually, it's beyond mean. Crooks himself is in the room talking to Lenny when he makes the comment that men get mean when they are lonely and when they'd like company. He himself tries to upset Lenny for no reason, asking him what would happen if George didn't come back from town. It seems that he does this just for fun, but he does it in a deeply cruel and aggressive way. Crooks's face lighted with pleasure in his torture. Crooks bored in on him. He continues to press his point, boring into him almost like a physical wish to cause pain. It is in this setting that Curley's wife enters, and it is here that she's radically and racially aggressive towards Crooks. She hurls a slur at him and crushes any hope he had of latching onto the dream form. Is there any excuse for this? If there isn't, then it would be very hard to agree that to know her is to love her. So what leads out to her lashing out in the scene? She arrives in the room and finds the three men here, noting as she enters that the other guys left all the weak ones here. Yet she was left behind as well. Therefore, she too must be one of the weak ones. While Candy has been left behind because he is too old, and Lenny because he was too dumb, and Crooks because he is too black, she too has been left behind while the guys, including her new husband, go to a whorehouse. We have to assume that the reason for her coming down to the bunkhouse is for company. But as soon as she enters the room, the guys shun her. They tell her sourly that Curley isn't there. They refuse to engage in conversation with her. So she's 2 weeks into her marriage with Curley, and he's at a brothel instead of with her. She's forbidden from talking to everyone but Curley, but he isn't nice to her. She must feel very alone and unloved at this point in her life, an outcast of sorts. And when she approaches the other outcasts on the ranch, they refuse to acknowledge her feelings. This really sends home the message about how utterly alone and unloved she really is. Crooks has already told us that loneliness causes people to become mean. So is this why she lashes out? She behaves this way in reaction to the male-dominated society in which she has been placed. Is she learning to respond with harshness, the same attitudes that she's surrounded by? We don't know, because we still do not yet know her. In Chapter 5, Curley's wife and Lenny meet up in the barn. This is a setting, again, that is neither really the ranch nor nature. Both she and Lenny are outside the community, and after an initial shyness, they do start to talk. It's a shyness that is overcome in part by her actions. For the only time in the novel, she displays the feminine instincts of a mother, comforting Lenny. She's trying to help Lenny overcome his grief at having killed the puppy, and in return, she puts her trust in him. This is the only point in the novel that we see her really trusting anyone. Here, she sees Lenny as somebody to whom she can tell her secret confessions to, such as the story of her past. People feel like they can talk to Lenny because Lenny, with his lack of intellect, is not seen as a threat to anybody. Lenny becomes Curley's wife's safe repository, and she tells her story there. Finally, we get to know her, and we find out that this girl with no name and no identity beyond that of her husband started off life living in a backwards town with her mother. It seems that there was a lack of male role models in her life, and like many girls of her time, she longs for the bright lights of the picture shows. If you pay attention to her vernacular, her actual English, as opposed to the way it's written, you see that her syntactical English is probably the weakest of the entire novel. This suggests that she comes from an impoverished background, one without great education, and one that has already begun to put her at a disadvantage into the society to which she wishes to join. If she wants to get into pictures, for example, she's going to have to learn to speak properly. This was the time period when movies were transitioning from silent films to talkies. So a girl with her harsh, brittle voice and a poor education is going to find it very hard to get into the movie business. When she meets an itinerant man who is supposedly in the movie business, he is in town for just one night. She spends the night with him on the promise of a golden future in the pictures. When a letter does not arrive from him, as promised, she blames her mother. It's natural to second guess this and to rationalize that he was using her and never meant to send her a letter. She's never going to be in the pictures. Instead, she's been tricked by a man who had his way with her and moved off. It's also very important to understand the social morals of this time period. Good girls were expected to remain virgins until they were married, and if they did not, they were considered spoiled goods. Now consider Curley's wife, who at age 16 has been tricked and tossed aside by a traveling salesman. She meets Curley at a dance. She thinks he's attractive. His father owns a big ranch. He's in shape with the body of a boxer. She's angry with her mom. She wants out of her backwoods town. The only thing of value that she had, her virginity, has already been lost. Therefore, when Curley pays attention to her, she jumps at the chance to be with him. They are married, just like that. Steinbeck has quite deliberately withheld all this information about her background until this point, because she never gets to talk to anybody. All we see is a male-dominated perspective of this girl, and it's a view that is cruel and harsh and unfeeling. After her death, we have to reassess our view of her. Steinbeck shows us this in the moments that immediately follow her death. He seems to slow time. The sun streaks were high on the wall by now, and the light was growing soft in the barn. Curley's wife lay on her back, and she was half covered with hay. It was very quiet in the barn, and the quiet of the afternoon was on the ranch. Even the clang of the pitched shoes, even the voices of the men in the game seemed to grow more quiet. The air in the barn was dusky in advance of the outside day. A pigeon flew in through the open hay door and circled and flew out again. Curley's wife lay with a half covering of yellow hay, and the meanness and the plannings and the discontent and the ache for attention were all gone from her face. She was very pretty and simple, and her face was sweet and young. Now her rouged cheeks and her reddened lips made her seem alive and sleeping very lightly. The curls, tiny little sausages, were spread on the hay behind her head, and her lips were parted. As happens sometimes, a moment settled and hovered and remained for much more than a moment, and sound stopped and movement stopped for much, much more than a moment. In this scene, Steinbeck allows the time for the enormity of what has happened to sink in. It's at this point that we know Curley's wife, And it's at this point that Steinbeck's idea that to know her would be to love her really is beginning to be vindicated thinking. Even when she was talking in the barn with Lenny, explaining how the guy had said that she was a natural, she made a small, grand gesture with her arm and hand to show that she could act. The fingers trailed after her leading wrist, and her little finger stuck out grandly from the rest. Steinbeck even uses noises off in the distance at this point to make sure that there's cheering from the guys playing horseshoes, as though an audience is giving her her one great performance. Perhaps Curley's wife striking a flamboyant pose in the doorway is less about sex appeal and more about her lost dream. Perhaps at that point in her mind, she is walking into a scene on stage, becoming the actress she so desperately dreams of being. She wants to be seen as an actress, seen to be living her dream, even if it is only in her mind. Sure, she does not have a real reason to come into the bunker. She doesn't have a real reason to go anywhere. She is the only woman on the ranch, and she is incredibly lonely. Nobody talks to her. Maybe the new guys will. All she wants is some company. The barn becomes a place that is removed from the male-dominated society of the ranch. It's a place used for solace and a place used for privacy. It's equally used by Lenny and Curley's wife. So is Curley's wife a cruel racist? I think that we have to accept that the attitude she portrays in that scene is an attitude that she has picked up from the other ranchers. She has heard others saying such things, and when she is rejected by even the 3 outcasts that have been left behind, the meanness caused by her extreme loneliness comes out. Maybe she thinks that these words will give her the authority and respect that she obviously lacks on the ranch. If you are familiar with the origin of the title of the novella, you know from the beginning that her dream is doomed to fail, no matter how much she believes in it. This is true of all of the dreams presented there. Even if we do not learn her dream until nearly the end of the story, we know that everything she does leading up to it, her plans, will most likely go awry. At the end, as she lies there in death, her features soften. The redness, the curls, her cheeks, her skin, it no longer carries the hardness and the meanness that was there before. It no longer contains the discontent, and the ache for attention. Instead, her features have softened to become something of beauty. She has been a hurting, uneducated young girl who was acting how she perceived she should or had to act. Perhaps she was behaving like a film star or trying to make the men like her. Maybe she thinks that this is what all women do, particularly those that are great film stars. Ultimately, she is a victim of her own dream and a victim of this time and place where no female is going to get a fair chance. We, too, judged her from the beginning, based upon a few words of gossip and a glimpse of her in the doorway. Yet, now that we know better, we understand her full story. Perhaps Steinbeck is right. Perhaps to know her is to love her.